Hi, I'm Jessie Heron, host of Rediscover Your Story, a podcast for marketers who need a break from everyday learning, but still want to hear from like-minded professionals on all things creative. And this week's guest is Ryan Hayes, author of Strategists First, and you're going to want to get your hand on this book. It's all about how strategy is the what, but the strategist is the who. So who are you? Are you a strategist, or do you just create a strategy?
When you talk about strategy, you're starting with a what, and rarely does the conversation get to the who. But when you start talking about strategists first, you center on the who. And I always give the analogy, players win championships and playbooks don't. Bill Gates used to take 2 weeks a year as a vacation for reading, right? Barack Obama, tried to read about 5 hours a week when he was president. Those are some of the most accomplished, busiest people of the modern era.
Sure.
If they can find time to read, what's our excuse? Creating a vocabulary for strategists that can become a movement. That's the way I've always thought about this project.
#but first, if you're loving Rediscover Your Story, go ahead and smash that bell and subscribe on YouTube. And don't forget to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, and wherever you can get your streaming content. And hey, if you're interested in who we are at Resolve, we're a video content agency, and we can help you create your video content marketing just like we're doing with the podcast. Please follow along at our website, resolve.com. That's RESLV.com. Subscribe to our newsletter and never hesitate to reach out to us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We can't wait to hear from you. But let's discover the who behind the novel. Let's rediscover Ryan's story. Ryan Hayes, is so great to have you on the Rediscover Your Story podcast. I just want to give a quick origin story. You have already known of Resolve because you've worked with Resolve. I didn't know this. Found you on LinkedIn, saw that you had a book, bought the book, dove into the book, and absolutely needed to have you on the podcast. But I just think it's really funny how it all kind of came together.
Yeah, I've known Scott for several years. We worked with him at the University of Cincinnati and was just so impressed with the creative talent that he brought to every single project. And that was very early on. So it seemed like it was sort of, a one-man show for a while. And then he started to build out his team. And what you all have been able to accomplish at this point is truly inspiring and humbling that we're doing it here in Cincinnati. This space is amazing, but importantly, the team is just fantastic. I mean, you've really built out your skill set in ways that have taken it to the next level. So can't wait to see sort of what the next level up for you all is. It's just been an amazing ride to see it.
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody that we did not pay you to say any of this, and that just came right off your tongue, and it was amazing, and we appreciate you being here
Definitely.
In the space.
Anything I could do. I mean, when you work with great, especially creative professionals, in my mind, you just can't do enough to really talk about the importance of that partnership, because they're managing your most important asset, which is your story, your brand. And when they do it well, when they take the care and the commitment that the organization brings to the table, when you see that reciprocated from a partner, it just really wants you to that trust is essential, right? So. Like I said, we've been early on with you all, and we're just going to continue to find ways to partner.
No, we totally appreciate you saying that. And I love what you said about how we're managing someone's most important asset, or a company's most important asset. I think you're right. Everyone's like, oh, video. My kid has a GoPro and they can handle that. Or like, my brother-in-law lives in my mother-in-law's basement. He can handle that. And you're like, no, actually, again, it's your most important, story, and let professionals handle that. But
I would encourage anyone who's skeptical or just wants to see it, show up early to one of these events and look how much time is put into the prep, whether it's lighting, sound, the camera equipment. I mean, they spend more time with the prep than you do with your performance. That should tell you something, right? That they really care about their craft. And it can't be done in an amateur way or with a firm that you don't trust. I mean, truly, it's your most important asset. So I'm not sure why you would leave it up to leave it up to a situation where you're trying to guess what the quality is going to be. I'd rather pay for the quality.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to do like this first part and cut it into a testimonial. Thank you to Ryan Hayes. But no, sure. I really am so excited. So again, found you on LinkedIn. Honestly, Pete Blackshaw made a LinkedIn post and I saw your name pop up, and you know how LinkedIn has this amazing algorithm. And I went to your LinkedIn page, saw that you had a book, saw the title, which is Strategists First is the title of the book. And how to defeat the strategy trap. I instantly went scouring for it. Couldn't get the book fast enough. You can get it on Amazon, but I needed it instantly. So I downloaded it from Kindle and just went straight into it and basically was like, hey, I really need you on this podcast. And I will say that I zoomed through the book. It was easy to get through, but I cannot wait to chat about it. And I want to talk about, where did you come up with the idea to even start to write a book? Because I can't imagine that that's very easy. I know that it wasn't as easy to start a podcast, but I can't imagine how hard it was to get a book going and just this idea and just to see a little seed turn into an awesome printed piece.
Well, thank you so much for your support.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Writing something I've been doing my entire career. I started out as a speechwriter and have always mainly been ghostwriting, right? Writing for other people under their name. And I've been doing strategy work for nearly 2 decades now, and I'd always have people come up and say, hey, I want to be a strategist. What would you recommend in terms of reading? And I always struggle to find sort of a good book recommendation because, as sort of the testament to the book, most books are about strategy and not about strategist, right?
Yep.
So what I wanted to be able to do was provide sort of a how-to guide, one that was easily accessible. I mean, I'm in academia, but I didn't want it to be an academic book per se. I mean, I wanted it to be well-researched, but I didn't want it to come across as being sort of too theoretical. So I wanted to have plenty of practical tips.
Yes.
And again, just, one of those things that you could either sit down and read very quickly or read over time. So the whole structure of the book was built with a commitment to the reader. I kept asking myself, as a reader, what would I want to read, right? Not what I want to write. I mean, right. That's a different orientation. It's what do I want to read? And I wanted to be able to, create chapters that were sort of mini books, right? Yes. Ones that could sort of stand on their own, that you could get through pretty quickly in between meetings. I really worked hard to not have any wasted words. So I really tried to wring as many sort of word count. I wanted every word to sort of, get the most mileage out of every single sentence. So worked hard to really put a book together that was reader-centric, reader first. And
you have great examples in there too. I think that you didn't mention that, but I want to mention that there's stories and examples of well-known brands here in Cincinnati, brands worldwide, and things that you also talked about. So I personally love that too.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, for me as a reader, again, you can sort of tell me a concept, but when you're able to actually ground it in an example of a brand that you know, for me it always sticks a little bit better. And that was the goal, was to try to find those examples that would really illustrate the point. And I sort of mentioned this in the preface of the book. I made a really deliberate decision early on in the writing that I wasn't going to have any of my own stories, any sort of personal reflections or stories in the book. And I did that because so many of these books I read about strategy, and especially leadership books, they end up being a little bit of revisionist history for the author. They start talking about the things they did, and inevitably it just seems like embellished is probably not the right word, but there's a sort of a retrospective wisdom that seems to be there, that you're like, oh, how did you know that in real time? Like, it's easy to look back and apply, kind of that retroactive wisdom to a situation. And to me, I'm trained as a psychoanalyst, so I'm sort of, attuned to these things. I just thought that books like that, the writer is sort of bringing too much of their own personal baggage to the reader.
Right, and, you're like, this isn't your therapy book.
Yeah.
This is something to help me.
Totally.
I don't want to help you.
Totally. So I read these books and I'm just like, people are trying to repair kind of their reputation as a leader with the book. And it's just like, well, okay, but, does a reader really want to read that, right? And again, I wrote this as a reader first, right? Which it meant for me is what content's going to help me do my job better, faster, smarter. And hearing your personal stories might be entertaining, but is it really going to get me where I want to go? So that was the orientation from the start, and it really helped me clarify kind of what examples to use and what stories to use, because it was never a test in my mind of should I use this personal example, because from the get-go I just said just not going there.
Not gonna have it. Yeah. So I think that just to tell people who are listening, the major premise I took away from the book is I have grown up in a marketing function my entire career. And you hear so many people, especially getting in more to a digital market. It's in every industry, so I should say that. But me being in a digital industry, strategy is such a buzzword. Mm-hmm. Strategy, transformation, innovation, right? Like those are the buzzwords. Yep. And what I loved that I really took away from the very beginning of the book was strategy is a what, a strategist is a who. Yeah. And to me, it instantly provided the clarity of, am I truly a strategist, or did I just know how to come up with a strategy? Yeah. Which is a plan, right? And you just kind of get into your own head about it. And I really love the way that you broke that down and you kept reiterating it throughout every single portion of the book. I wouldn't say chapter, but every single part of the book. Yeah. Talk about that. Yeah.
So great line of questioning. So to me, that was always my aha moment was people talk a lot about strategy. I mean, it truly is a buzzword. And there's this great research study that I share in the book. These two academic researchers who were in, sort of business and strategy as their research expertise, kept hearing strategy over and over. And what they noticed was that everyone started kind of using the term in different ways. And so they went and did a lit review, basically, of all the literature on strategy from basically the 60s up until about 2008. And through that body of literature, they found 91 unique definitions of strategy.
I believe that. Because you could literally sit down an entire brainstorm of people who all have a marketing function or non-marketing function and say, what is a strategy to you? And you'd have people in there from maybe manufacturing to agencies to CPGs or all over the board, and everybody's going to have a different answer. Yeah, so great point. So I call it sort of the Rorschach test, right? Which is ink block test, right? Like, and you see a barn, I see a butterfly, somebody else sees a boat, right? Sure.
And so the idea is that, there's no standard definition of strategy, which is the high watermark of irony when you consider people, when they talk about strategy, the two things they think is most important is clarity and coherence. And here, the very definition doesn't have clarity and coherence. And so, and that research study ended in 2008. So imagine between 2008 and today, how many more new, unique definitions of strategy exist. So, and what's the key takeaway there is that, it's a word that people use all the time, but there's no sort of common definition or standard understanding. So, the point is the other real key takeaway from the definition conversation is if you look across those definitions, those unique definitions, there's one thing that tends to be missing from all of them, and that is a reference to the strategist, which gets back to your great point of, it's too much of a focus on a what and a how and not on the who. So I'd be curious from your professional experience. I mean, you obviously were doing strategy work.
Yes.
Did you ever feel like you had the support or training or preparation to do it? Obviously, you were doing it and you were doing it well, but
no. Well, and this is not a knock on the company that I was with. It wasn't that I didn't have necessarily the support. It was just that where do you get training for strategy? I felt like it was more born out of experience, right? So I think people just kind of tag on like, oh, I can do strategy because I've done my job for 6, 8, 10 years or whatever. So now I know it so well, inside and out. I've seen all the things that come at me. So pay me. I'll be the one to consult for you, and I'll create a strategy for you because I can see outside your organization better than you can. But it did not mean that I was a strategist. It just meant that I was really good at looking at the view from a 20,000 foot, seeing what everybody else was doing, and I could help move the pieces and come up with a plan. Right? That's what it meant. I think I've since learned that, what you talk about in your book is being able to see around the corners and looking at the forecasting and kind of coming up with this strategic direction, or more so than like the plan, and having this force to say, hey, let's just keep moving everybody in the direction that we need to move in based on this forecast or these learnings or whatever. And I think that was the piece that was sort of missing, and you're not taught that. When I went to school for communications and marketing, you were not taught that. You were just taught how to create a plan or a report or how to do something in branding or whatever. Yeah, right.
Well, that's so astute, because that, if you look at sort of, at the highest level, what's one of the key takeaways of the book? It's that people think of strategy again as a what, right? It's a tool, it's a skill, it's a plan, right? That's all what language.
Pay a lot of money for it.
Totally. But what we've seen is when it's those things, those are basically external to you, right? That those are things that exist in the world that aren't you, right? It's a tool, it's a skill, it's a plan, and when you have that sort of externality to it, people, in my experience, tend to rent the conversation or the outcome and not own it, right? So I always give the example of, you can hear a person that talk, they say they meditate. Okay, that doesn't mean they're a monk, right? And so you can strategize, but it doesn't mean you're a strategist, right? So strategist is an identity, it's a calling, right? I liken it to being an entrepreneur. You've probably been an entrepreneur at various points in your career, and you have plenty around you with this creative team. They're different. They're wired different. They're all in. They're always on, right? There's no off switch to an entrepreneur. That's the thing that I think the same identity for the strategist, right? You're always on. You sort of glue down the on switch. You're not a strategist some days and not others. It's always there, always on. And I think the best analogy would be at an entrepreneur. They can't turn it off. And I think if you have that same approach as a strategist, then you start to realize that, one of the best ways to tell if someone's a strategist is not only do they do it themselves, but do they coach others around them to do the same, right? Because that's a real sign that they understand the power of strategy is actually to create more strategists, right? To create a little bit of an army so that you graduate from sort of the precious few to the empowered many. Because that's truly a trap that many organizations fall into. They just have the C-suite that does strategy, and then the smoke goes up in the chimney, and they make the decisions, and then they think, I'll just pass this down to all the other folks, and they'll be in charge of execution. And what we've seen for the past 50 years in the realm of strategy is that rarely works, right? Most strategies fail, and they fail because the people that make them and pass them, quote unquote, pass them off to the people that implement them, and people implement don't feel a sense of ownership, right? They feel like they were told to do it. They don't have any sense of buy-in or participation.
And also they're like, how did you know what we're supposed to be doing if you don't do my job?
Totally.
Right? Like you're not in the trenches. You're in your ivory tower or whatever. I mean, this is a really dramatic explanation, but that's kind of what it is.
It's perfect. There's an old story, an old saying, generals die in bed, which is the concept that, generals aren't out on the front lines with their soldiers. They're in the comfort of their own bed. And the same for, when you think about an executive around being a strategist, most CEOs are savvy strategists. That's how they got there. But if they're not really working with the folks on the front line to develop the strategy, it's going to miss, right? It's just not going to have the level of stickiness, and then more importantly, ownership to really make it work. So, I think your experience is one I hear, over and over again, is people who love doing strategy work. They consider themselves a strategist. They just kind of wish there was a playbook to kind of help talk about this in a different way, so that we could start to share some of these best practices and figure out what works and what doesn't. And again, when you talk about strategy, you're starting with a what and a how, and rarely does the conversation get to the who, right? But when you start talking about strategists first, you center on the who, right? And then the what and the how comes after. And I always give the analogy, essentially a sports analogy, right? Which is players win championships and playbooks don't, right?
Right.
And we see that over and over. You do need a playbook, and it needs to be great, but at the end of the day, it's the players that make the best plays. And it's the same thing for this conversation. Like, I'm not anti-strategy, just the opposite. I think strategy is how strategists define who they are and why they matter. But it's important to start with the who. Once you start with the who, then in my mind, all strategy then flows from there.
Well, and I loved and this is why I asked you to bring multiple books, because like I mentioned, I was in the midst of the book. And then to your point is you, as a strategist, you want to also become a coach, and you want to, basically empower others within your organization to also become strategists. And then that way you're all working off maybe the same playbook, or working off the same mentality of, hey, we're going to go into meetings and we're going to ask questions, or we're going to go into a brainstorm. And instead of just like only throwing out ideas, which, as everybody knows, when you're doing that, you become exhausted really quickly. Ideas tend to kind of dwindle really quickly. But let's ask more questions. And, I have to say that was one of the things where I was like, okay, first of all, we need books for everybody here at the office at Resolve. Everyone needs to get on the same page. But it ultimately made me think of an agency who I will not mention, where I was brought in to help consult on a digital project. And they had, just like everybody has, account directors and all the levels, right? The ABMs, the whatevers. And one of them said to me, when a client came in and we were sharing this client, and it was a client that needed to have a website done, and there's questions. You have to ask questions. You have to know different things to understand what it is they want to accomplish for the now, for the 5 years from now. What are the products? I mean, just the list goes on. And I would go into these meetings and have questions, and then I would get pulled aside and say, hey, you're going to have to stop asking questions. It's getting really awkward in there because you're asking a lot of questions. And I was reading this book, and I have had some PTSD from that. I mean, I was younger, right? So I was younger, and then I felt like I shouldn't be asking questions in meetings. And then I was, I since grew out of that. I'm definitely more seasoned. Don't want to say my age, but, and I was reading this book, and I was like, you are supposed to ask questions. I was doing it right this whole time.
You were.
Maybe I will anonymously send this book to that person, but, just as like my final, like, no, I won't do that.
It's such a great story because it speaks to what intuitively you knew to be true, which is what you see when you see people who are really operating at a high level in terms of strategy, right? A true strategist.
But I would not say I was a strategist then. I was just learning.
I think you had the habits of mind that lead to that. It's just a matter of probably sharpening your focus and iterating more. But I mean the point is the habit was there, right? And you knew it intuitively, because again, when you watch sort of a master strategist, what you realize is they typically, they have sort of the 80-20 rule. They actually end up probably asking questions about 80% of the time and providing non-questions about 20% of the time. But when you listen to most non-strategists, it's just the opposite, right? People sort of idolize answers, and they're always trying to get to the answer and never really thinking or talking in questions. And it's the reason it's a hallmark, I think, signature of a strategist is because it speaks to curiosity. I mean, what you were trying to do was really kind of peel back the onion. You were curious about, why do you really want to do this, right? And it's so sophisticated to understand that if you don't have that clarity that's born of curiosity, whatever you do downstream is going to get caught up in a lot of those assumptions that may not be true, right? And then you end up with a product that just ends up being missing the mark. And I think it's a function of not imposing clarity sooner in the process. And that's what you were trying to do with those questions. Was impose some clarity to the conversation.
Right. Because I do think, I don't know, I just find it interesting. I've never worked at a very large corporation, and I'm not trying to knock any large corporations. It's just that I always was nervous about the bureaucratic red tape, but I think I was also nervous about you can't really ask questions. You can't, in very general, to say this, but like in these organizations that are so large, you do have the CEOs or the C-suites that are just imposing their strategy. And then you have the worker bees that are implementing said strategy. And so I think that's why I've always worked at a smaller agency. But anyway, I thought that, diving into the book and knowing that our team is just that sweet spot of, okay, let's get everybody to read the book. And we do have tons of opportunities where we come in and we brainstorm together. And many clients come to us and say, hey, we have this potential opportunity. What kind of video is going to work best, right? And there's lots of opportunities for us to come in and brainstorm. And I even thinking about one that we did over the summer, we could have asked way more questions, but I think, again, it's empowering our team so that they don't feel like the young woman in that office or in that meeting who was asking questions and then getting scolded. I want to empower them to say, hey, 25, 26, 27-year-old, you're the one actually that's going to have the kick-ass ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, in reality, the young talent has really great ideas.
Totally.
So let me help coach you, to your point, on how to ask questions to sort of get to the good idea and to tweak in to get to that good idea. But I think it's pretty cool. One of the main things when I was reading in your book that I wanted you to touch on is forecasting.
Yeah.
I think this might be, for me, my biggest blind spot in becoming and being a strategist. If you don't mind just kind of talking about the importance of forecasting.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, when we think about forecasting, we often think about, people trying to predict, in the future, X will happen on Y date, right? And we go back to sort of the cultural side of predicting, which is, the magic 8-ball, the Ouija board, Zoltar. If you remember all of those things from the 80s and 90s, the sort of the cultural side of in that case it was fortune telling, right? Which is essentially tell us about
I'm thinking
future.
of like the movie Big with Tom Hanks.
Totally,
that's
Zoltar.
What I'm thinking.
Yeah,
okay, just want to make sure that.
So that was all sort of the cultural side of can you predict the future? Can you see around the corner and tell us what's going to happen? The cultural side of sort of fortune telling, I think, has done no good service to the professional side of forecasting, which the professional side of forecasting are the people who have to do this for a living. So you think about analysts in various parts of the government that have to forecast about geopolitical issues.
Yeah.
You think about.
I instantly thought of analyst.
Yeah,
That's what I
right.
thought of.
So you have an intelligence analyst, right? Or you have a venture capitalist. I mean, a venture capitalist is looking at 10 different companies to invest in and trying to predict, right, forecast which one of these is going to be successful. And in many cases, they get usually 7 to 8 of those wrong and 2 to 3 of those right, and the 2 to 3 pay off for the rest. But what they're doing is forecasting. So it's easy to sort of be a little bit dismissive about forecasting because it's so hard to do. And the NCAA bracket for March Madness is a great example, right?
Sure.
I mean, Warren Buffett has offered several $1 billion worth of rewards if someone can get an accurate bracket, and it's never happened, right?
Sure.
Because again, it's so difficult to sort of predict that. But the people who do it for a living actually have been able to really explain kind of the craft behind it. And that's what I go into in the book. There was a professor, Philip Tetlock, who looked at forecasters and basically tried to determine their habits of mind and whether or not, from their habits, you could basically teach it to other people. And what he found is that they approach problems much differently than the rest of us. And just a few tidbits is they will basically take a really big question, like, is X going to happen in the future? And they break it down into smaller parts. So they don't try to answer the big question. They break it into smaller parts, and then they assign probability that something's going to happen, right? Because in their experience, it's never helpful to think that something's going to happen either 0% of the time or 100% of the time.
Sure.
It's able to sort of calibrate some level of likelihood, probability. And then they, again, start to use the information they have, the data points, to sort of stress test those ideas. And they continue to evaluate and revise and recalibrate. And so they're never really willing to just give you an answer and say, this is going to happen 100% of the time or zero. They'll tell you, well, this is likely to happen 60% of the time, and they're always revising that.
Sure.
And so, again, it's the habits of mind from in this case, it was super forecasters, people who are really good at forecasting, is what I cover in the book, is many of those same habits of mind are what strategists do, right? They're often asked to sort of see around the corner.
They are.
And how do you go about doing that?
Yeah.
And so I provide some practical tips of how you can do that. And one of the best ways, honestly, is to keep a little scorecard of yourself of your own predictions. And again, it's not the prediction that X will happen on Y date. That's sort of a fool's errand, right? It's like trying to stick a bullseye with a noodle, right? Like, technically I guess you could, but like, the odds of that's happening is longer than long. So the key here is to be able to kind of keep tabs on trends and different patterns that you see evolving, and then start to keep a little bit of your own scorecard of, I think the world is evolving in this way, and here's my theory of things to come.
And do you think it's important, or I guess important's not the right word, but do you think it's maybe easier to do that within your own maybe organization to start? So like thinking about trends within the video industry, for example, right? And there's all kinds of forces that are coming in. I think everyone's freaking out about AI. Like AI is going to take our job. Well, no, I don't think I'm going to see a robot build all the cameras, bring in all the equipment, set up the lighting. If so, maybe Steve would be like, cool, I want one of those, because he's the one that does all the heavy lifting. but I don't think that's going to happen. But to maybe think about other, trends and see if you can kind of see things happening before others. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, so
like start in your own industry, or?
Yeah, great point. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's both from the inside and also from the out, because the inside is really understanding kind of where your competitors are and that context. But oftentimes when an industry gets disrupted, it gets disrupted from the outside, right?
Great point.
And so understanding those macro level trends with the rest of society is really important. So I would say it's not an either or, it's both. And the example I give in the book about really being diligent about understanding your context is from Sam Walton, the iconic founder of Walmart. He was in his 60s, and he and his family took a trip down to Brazil, and by that time he was a multi-billionaire.
I'm laughing because I know.
Sort of the end of his career, not the end, but the latter part of his career. And his friends were where they were staying, and he left, and they thought he was just going out and touring the city on his own. And he was gone for a couple of hours, and then they got a phone call from the police station, and they wanted them to come down and pick him up. So his family was shocked, like, why in the world is he at a police station? And kind of find out in Brazil that he had been arrested because he was at a competitor's store, and he was down on the bottom of the aisle, on the floor, measuring the width of the aisles because he wanted to understand the context of his competitor and to determine if that was going to impact his thinking about Walmart, not just in the United States, but globally. So again, it's that sort of, I call it sort of the, Sam Walton moment on the floor. Like, as a strategist, like, what are you doing to help understand the context around you? Are you willing to go to sort of that length to be able to really understand not only a competitor, but the broader sort of context and market? So again, to your point, it's so important to be open to both of those, right? The internal dynamics, but also the external. And that's what, again, why I love being around creatives like you all is I think creatives are sort of naturally inclined to do that, right? They find sources of inspiration from all over, right? It's not like they're like, oh, well, I only like this type of art, right? Typically, I love being around creatives because they'll be like, well, I like this music, I like this art, I like this author, and it's so eclectic, right? And I think it's in that eclecticism that's the power of sort of bringing together different disciplines and different ideas. And again, it just comes sort of natural for creatives. I think it's similar for strategists. I mean, they're typically, they live wide in terms of, they find inspiration from multiple sources, and they're really good curators. I mean, if I would say there's one, again, attribute to really distinguish a strategist from a non-strategist, is they're really great curators. They're able to take insights from a number of different sources and synthesize, which is essentially what this book is, right? I mean, this is not a lot of original theory. It's just stitching together and synthesizing some other really great strategists.
Right. But you're doing it in a way where I can read the book and take away these practical, I I don't know, just like tips immediately, right? I think, there's this sort of, at the end of each, I don't know, section or part, right? There's practicality for each one, which I think is nice. But I agree with you. I think that in a creative space, and I've only really truly been in a creative space my entire career, is that you are pulling together a ton of different backgrounds who love to have opinions, which is great, which is great. And again, it's a matter of giving them a voice and helping them to hone their craft to better, be strategists, I think. Yeah. I mean, if you're thinking about, I just want to, bring some practicality to our own conversation. Yeah. And, I'm thinking about some of the past guests that we've had on Rediscover Your Story, and even thinking about future people or future listeners. It's a wide range of, I'd say, demographics and age, and mostly having some sort of tie to marketing, which is nice. I mean, what would you say to them? I mean, besides buying your book, which again, I will 100% endorse and buy it for many people. But what are some first things that someone can do to just kind of even do the litmus test? Am I a strategist? Am I part of the problem and just want to do strategy for everybody? I mean, what are some practical things that they maybe 1, 2, 3 tips that they can maybe do?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So thank you for that.
It's hard maybe to answer, but
no,
yeah.
I think at the most basic level, I wouldn't overcomplicate it. I would just be simple in saying, be a student. Be a student of whatever area you're interested in, right? Because if you're a student of, let's say, visual communication or the written word or video production or podcasting, right? If you're a student of it, that speaks to a curiosity that's going to drive, kind of your conversation earlier about, being in the room and just wanting to ask questions, right? Yeah. When you're a student, you typically think in questions, or you should be, right? Not in answers. So it's that student mindset that I think is really important to bring to any domain, especially from a marketing standpoint, because when you're a student, you've got that sort of confident humility, right? You can, you want to jump in and do the work, but you also know there's got to be a better way to do it. And you're sort of always asking what that is. And to me, there's just no reason to overcomplicate it. Just kind of step into a situation with a student mindset and just learn. And for me, that's typically where I've seen people thrive is when they come to it with again kind of a humility that they start to understand the craft. I mean, again, just my observation as an outsider looking at the great work that creatives do. There's a craft element to their work that you often don't see in other professions. That they just take a remarkable amount of pride in the small details, which end up being the big impact. Right. And to me, again, as a student, you start to really see those things differently, right? You start to pay attention to the things that maybe other people don't pay attention. And once you can see those unfamiliar things in familiar settings, that's really your superpower. Right. No, I think that's great. And what is the future for you, Ryan Hayes? I mean, you've got this great book out. Are you thinking about your next book? Are you thinking about, I mean, what should we be excited about with you? Well, I think, I've got a quote on the back of the book from one of the legendary venture capitalists in the country, Jim Getz, and he talks about it being sort of a burn the boats movement. And that's the way I've always thought about this project is creating a vocabulary for strategists that can become a movement so that people can really start to own this sense of, okay, we're just not going to talk about strategy as an organization. We're actually going to build an army of strategists. And to me, that's where I sort of see, at least the near term, is really trying to help build that movement of people being empowered to say, I'm going to be a strategist, and it doesn't matter if I have that in my title or if my organization, gives me those assignments. I'm going to be a strategist no matter what. Right. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Yeah. And so if I can help people understand that, they don't have to look externally for validation to be a strategist. If they live that identity into action, it's who they are. It's what they do, and it's why they matter. And they don't need anyone to tell them that they're validated to do it.
Right. They don't need a badge or anything.
No, not at
say,
all.
Strategist.
It's remarkable how many people have it. If you look at LinkedIn, especially, a ton of people have it on their profile. And again, I think people are hungry and craving for that type of validation and recognition. And I think it's on organizations to really make good on that desire and that promise. I mean, right before the pandemic, organizations spent about $35 billion a year on strategy consultants, right?
I was just going to bring this up, that they go outside to bring in strategy and strategists.
Yeah, so it's a great turn of phrase.
And you're probably laughing, you could build them internally.
Well, yeah, that's just it. Essentially, people think, oh, well, I'm hiring a big strategy firm to come in and give me a strategy. No, what you're really doing is you're renting their strategists, right? Because those folks are master strategists, right? And so essentially you're renting them for a couple weeks or a month. They give you a strategy, but then they leave, right? And then you have to implement that strategy, and you don't have an army of strategists to do it. And so that's why those efforts often fail flat, even though they spend a ton of money. So again, the whole takeaway from the book is build it yourself, right? Build an army of strategists throughout your organization at all levels, not just the C-suite, and you'll have that level of ownership you need to really move forward. I mean, one of the concepts that really hit me as critical as that I touch upon in the book is, for a lot of organizations, they have what I call strategy outages. And so you think about sort of as rolling blackouts, right, of electricity. Typically, when you have a new CEO, a transition of CEOs, the organization will either, kind of put the strategy on hold.
They put everything on hold. Let's just wait until this new one gets in.
Totally. So you see
they might have a new vision.
Totally.
Yeah.
So you see that with a new CEO. You even see that when they hire chief strategy officers. Well, this person's coming in, 3 months from now, so we're going to, again, just push pause, and then they'll take the reins. Or in some cases, when an organization has a strategy and it's sort of reached its, kind of conclusion, before they start their next one, they'll take, time in between. And
a little vacation.
Yeah, sometimes that's weeks, sometimes that's
mental
months
vacation.
Or more. And effectively what it is you're literally putting strategy on hold. You're pressing pause. And that doesn't happen if you have a strategist, working in your organization, because they don't take any time off. They're a strategist no matter what's happening within the rest of the organization. And to me, that's the power of people, right? Is they're going to do their job and they're going to do it well, no matter what sort of the noise is in the rest of the organization. And so, again, I think if you look at the organizations that have really thrived over time, it's ones that they've been able to have those strategists at all levels. A.G. Lafley, when he was at P&G, really emphasized capable strategists at all levels, and he sort of used that as a way to kind of build professional development into the organization. And it's, I think, one of the reasons why P&G has been such a hotbed to train CEOs for other organizations, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because they were trained as strategists throughout their time at P&G as they worked up through the organization. So by the time they got to that level, they were able to move on to another organization and be the master strategist there. But again, I would just say that, your experience is similar to what I hear from a lot of folks is you have the passion, you've actually practiced it yourself, you just haven't had sort of the vocabulary to explain it to others. And
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I think let's pause there for a second. That's exactly what it is. When I was reading the book, I think that's why I was so excited about the book, was I was like, Ryan Hayes gets me. He's literally speaking to my soul. And there were so many things in there where you would, I don't know, I think it'd be hard to not do a mental checklist of your own career when you read the book, your current situation and your current work environment. And one of the things that I was thinking about is, we've been talking here internally, and as we record it, we're recording in January, but we've been talking about what happens if we implement a work from home day for 1 day a week. It's the same day for everybody. And what would that do to our organization? And in my mind, I see that day as a day to just think, ideate. It's quiet. You're not having the water cooler time, which I love because I love being in an office, but having 1 day where you're just given the flexibility to breathe and think and not maybe be tied completely to your email or to your to your communication, but just an opportunity to, I think you put in the book, just write ideas. And And to have an organization that's actually thinking about allowing us to do that is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, how many organizations allow you to just have a day to be home to just be better at your job?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And I think about, again, that's what one of the things I did. It's just really hard not to compare, but I just, throughout the entire book, I was like, that's why I needed the physical copy. I'm like, I need to make notes. I need Post-its. I need all kinds of things in here.
Well,
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I mean, again, very astute to center on, honestly, the one habit, I list 5 habits of a strategist.
Yeah.
And the reason I list lead time as the number one is because I think it's the most important. So we talk a ton in society about time management. This book talks about time leadership, right? It's just not managing time, it's leading time.
Right.
And to lead time, you really have to understand, I went through, for research for this book, I went through a ton of basically longitudinal timetables, meaning, how do people use their time when they're at work? And, and so I grafted a number of different studies and zeroed in on the fact that when you add up, like, how much time do you spend on email? How much time do you spend on meetings? How much time do you spend on conflict within the workplace? And then other stuff being bathroom breaks and lunch and water cooler conversations. So when you add all that up in a typical day for a typical professional, you end up with about 19 minutes of unstructured time. But here's the challenge is those 19 minutes don't come in one single chunk.
No.
They come in 2 minutes here, 4 minutes there, and 6 minutes there. But to your point, it's not enough time to really do
anything.
Work.
It's not enough time to do anything, Ryan. I mean, I think people listening to this, when they hear that part, they're going to be like, yeah, that's me. I'm in meetings all day long.
Yeah.
I never have time to go to the bathroom and I always feel beholden to my calendar and to my email. And I just want to tell people, like, turn off the email for a couple of hours. You're doing marketing. You're actually not saving a life,
So in that chapter, I talk about a concept called deep work day. And it's just that, to take a day off, whether it's once a week or a couple times a month, and no emails, no meetings, no interruptions. It's just you and your best thinking self for 8 hours. And if you think about it, and I've done this. I've done this with colleagues, and everyone thinks they can't do it. They're just like, it's not even possible. My schedule's already overbooked, and it would just be beyond difficult to do. And what I've found is that when you create that opportunity, once people do it, they don't ever want to give it up.
Sure.
Because they realize it's actually a superpower. Because what happens is, we talk oftentimes about return on investment, ROI. This brings to mind the question of ROT, return on time, right? So if you think about your average workday, in the office, working, your typical routine, the ideas that you work with in a typical day are, I would call 1X ideas or 2X ideas, right? These are ideas that make the trains run on time, which is important for any organization.
Right.
But they're not breakthrough ideas. In a deep work day, again, 8 hours of you working outside of your normal context. So that may be at home, that may be at a co-working space, that may be at a coffee shop, but it's you with no meetings, no email, no interruptions. And if you can do that for big chunks of time, you start to unlock a strategic level of thinking and insight and action that can return you 8X, 10X ideas. And so if you compare, again, working in the office for 1 to 2X ideas versus a deep think day that can deliver 10X ideas, you realize one of those deep work days is worth 10 office days, right? And so as an organization, especially an organization like your all's that's made up of entrepreneurs,
right?
If you could create an environment where they're unlocking 10X ideas every month or even every week, the impact on the organization is going to be game changing, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really forcing people to think about, again, moving from time management to time leadership. And again, if you look at people who are doing this at a really high level in terms of master strategists, that's what they do. And there's some obvious like high level examples of, Bill Gates used to take 2 weeks a year as a vacation for reading, right? They called it sort of his reading vacations. And that's all he would do. He would just read for 2 weeks a year. Barack Obama, tried to read, about 5 hours a week when he was president. Warren Buffett claims he spends about 80% of his time reading. So again, those are some of the most accomplished, busiest people of the modern era.
Sure.
If they can find time to read and again, get to that sort of strategic mindset, what's our excuse for the rest of us?
Right. Yeah. What are we doing?
Yeah.
Why am I wasting my time listening to Britney Spears on Audible? That's really the question that I'm actually wondering
There's
right now.
There's got to be a strategy there. I mean,
the strategy is
she's getting people to buy the book. So
I just wanted to understand what was happening with that train wreck. Oh God. Let's retract that. Steve, don't let that part end up in the podcast.
No promises.
All Britney's cut out.
All Britney's talk is done.
It's Britney, bitch.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's fair. Oh my gosh, Ryan, this was excellent. I feel like I could talk your ear off. I'm probably going to get the 5-minute warning from Steve. Like, Jesse, we got to wrap this up. But this is incredible. This is a really great book. Thanks for bringing them. And I can't wait to tell everybody about it. I can't wait for us to have this podcast live. And, I think that, again, as a marketer, as someone who's on an agency side who does need to think at a high level at a lot of times, not just for the organization that we have here, but for our clients, I would encourage many people in my same position to pick up the book. It really gives you those practical thinking of, okay, how can I take this to the next level? So I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wow. We just had author Ryan Hayes. He's with Strategists First, How to Defeat the Strategy Trap. I got to tell you, Steve, I'm so glad that he brought these copies for us. I needed a hard copy to put some notes in and go back through it, but I blasted through this book on my Kindle, and I think you're going to like it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just listening to the two of you talk this whole time, like everything he was saying was so fascinating and interesting. And now, like he gave me a book, and so I've got some light reading to breeze through here.
Yeah, it is. It's very easy to get through. I'll tell you. I was really having this epiphany after epiphany when I was reading the book, and it's going to sound a little weird, like, okay, Jesse, loser, but seriously, I wanted to say so many times, like, I think I'm a strategist, but I didn't know how to put into words what it is that he actually does for us and puts down here in this book. And he has so many practical tips. So if you're one within your organization that you are like, hey, we need to come up with a strategy, and you use those buzzwords, it's more about strategy is the what and a strategist is the who. And that's what I loved about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, I mean, the quote on the back from Jim Getz is like a manifesto for innovators and entrepreneurs. Like that's some high praise.
Yeah. And we talked to a lot of entrepreneurs on our podcast, and I think that they would like it. But I also think that if you're kind of midpoint, you've been in your career for a couple years, even that kind of person, I think would be great with it. And guess what? I got a signed copy. Oh. Neener.
That better not show up on eBay.
It's not. No, it's not going to show up on eBay. But I actually, gosh, I'd like to even just like grab a cup of coffee with Ryan. I think he was just really fun to talk to. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy that we now all get copies here at work, because I think it's important for us to think as strategists as we go into brainstorms with clients. I also loved, he has a portion of the book where he talks about having a strategic direction. So it's not about having like a strategy plan, but more of a direction. And if you think about it, Steve, when you put something pen to paper as a plan, like we are going to do X, Y, and Z, that's just one way of doing things. When he talks about having a strategic direction, you can say, okay, we're going north. You can go north a little bit west. You can go north a little bit east. So you have more freedom and flexibility to kind of pivot on your path. And I think that's what we all should be doing, no matter where we are in our careers. So this one gets my stamp of approval. I loved this book. I can't wait for everybody else to read this book. And if you've not read or heard of Ryan Hayes, please pick up a copy of this book. You can get it on Amazon. You can download it to your Kindle. That's how I read it. But I encourage you to actually get the physical book, because you're going to want to take notes. Hey, guess what? You made it to the end of the podcast. That's awesome. And you know what you get for that? You get more content. Check out this content from the Resolve team, all about Rediscover Your Story podcast content right here. You click on it, you might get a treat. Find out. Steve, make it stop.